Chapter 8. Keeping Ezra's picture in my mind, I retraced the steps I had to make, so hesitatingly in the dark 2 nights before. The air held the chill of October, but the sun was shining, warming my face and making the autumn colors of the trees glow. As I walked, I thought of the other autumn days when Mama was still alive, before Pa was hurt. On days like today, I'd be out helping Pa in the field, bringing in our harvest of squash, corn, and beans, or practicing with my slingshot, or playing catch with Molly, trying to keep the ball away from Duffy and Winston. Tears sprang suddenly to my eyes, and I brushed them angrily away. Those days are gone, I told myself, and they'll never come back. I headed east, keeping the sun to my right, looking for the landmarks Ezra had drawn. In the late afternoon, I began to recognize places in the forest where I had been hunting with Pa. Soon I was standing on a ridge, looking down at the opening in the trees that we had worked so hard to clear. I saw our cabin and our fields. They weren't green anymore, but had on their harvest colors of brown and orange and yellow. I could see the animal pens and Mama's small flower garden that Molly and I had tried to keep up. It was strange, looking at our farm that way. I had always thought of it as being so safe, big and safe and proud. But looking down at it now, it looked like it was made from a little carved wooden toys Pa and Mama had bought for me from Isaac the peddler's sack. The woods all around, which usually felt friendly and familiar, seemed cold and uncaring. Shaking off the feeling, I began to hurry over the last miles to our cabin, thinking about what needed to be done. After feeding and watering all the animals, I'd saddle up Job and load Krabby with hay and grain, enough for a couple of days. I'd fill up the pig's trough with plenty of feed and scatter lots of corn for the chickens. If I filled the big tub with water, it would last for 2 or 3 days. Then, I figured, depending on how long it took for Pa to mend, we'd all come back together, or I'd come myself and tend to the animals again. I was worried that Ms. Tiz would eat up all the food the first day and get sick, or that she or the piglets might knock over the water tub, but I guess it was a chance I'd have to take. Anxious now to see the animals, I began to run. I thought how glad Job would be to see me. He'd whinny and come over to nuzzle my neck. Crabapple would pretend he didn't much care, but his ears would perk up anyhow and give him away. The chickens would do their usual foolish fussing, and Miss Tiz would grunt to let me know that she expected me to scratch her back and behind her ears with a stick. Stepping into the clearing, I called, "Here, Job! Here, Krabby! Here, you two! I'm home!" I watched for them to come to the fence looking for me, but there was no movement, no answering whinny, nothing at all. I ran through the gate. There was no sign of Job or Krabby in the yard or the barn. Maybe they got so hungry and thirsty they broke out and wandered off, I thought. I walked along the fence, looking for a break, but the fence was solid. I ran to the shed where we kept the chickens and pigs. Something was very wrong. I knew then. It was much too quiet. Even when Job and Krabby were out working, the yard was noisy, filled with clucks and squabbles, grunts and squeals. But an unearthly quiet hung over the yard and made me want to turn and run. I peered into the shed. In the dim light that filtered through the cracks, I saw the outline of Ms. Tiz lying in her usual corner near the trough. She was so still. There was no snuffle or greeting, no scramble of piglets by her side. I knelt beside her in the semi-darkness and reached out to stroke her head. I quickly drew back my hand. Ms. Tiz was cold. Then I saw the blackened hole through her forehead where a bullet had passed. There was no sign of the piglets. Dimly, I realized that the dead bodies of chickens lay strewn about the ground. The sight of the slaughtered animals brought back that night years ago when I lay in my bed, feeling sick and scared, listening to my parents talk about a man named Weasel. I sat beside Ms. Tiz, and I knew that Weasel had been here. He had done this, I was certain. For a moment, I wanted Mama to be there to rock me and sing to me. I wanted Pa to hold me in his strong arms and make me laugh. I wanted to go back to the time before I knew that men could do things like this. You can't go back, I thought. and I felt my face twisting with hatred until I knew I looked away the way Ezra looked when he thought of Weasel. My hatred made me feel strong. I stood up and thought about what to do. I got the shovel from its place in the corner. We had a small cemetery on the north side of the farm. Mama was buried there. Our first horse, Gabriel, was there, and so was a dog, Lallygag, and some other small animals Molly and I had kept as pets. I would bury Ms. Tiz. Pa said once that the difference between savages and civilized men was that civilized men buried their dead. I pushed her large body onto a feed sack, tied a rope around the whole thing, and dragged it to the cemetery. As I began digging the grave, I remember asking Pa, why do folks call the Shawnees savages then? We had seen plenty of Indian burial mounds in the areas where the Indians had been driven off. They bury their dead, same as us. Pa's answer had been long and complicated, and it seemed to make him sad. I didn't really understand all of it. He said the white men called the Indians savages because that made it easier to hate them, and hating them made it easier to drive them off or kill them. And take their land. He said that as long as folks thought of the Shawnees as savages, they didn't have to think of them as people. Like I said, I didn't really understand most of it. Of course, the Shawnees were people. Just calling a thing something else didn't change it. I thought about weasels cutting out Ezra's tongue and killing Indians and poor settlers, and Ms. Tiz, too. Seemed to me he was more of a savage than anybody I've ever heard of. Couldn't white folks be savages, too? I kept digging. In some way, I couldn't quite put words to it. Burying Ms. Tiz helped make up for the awful way she had died. It was the only thing I could do for her. I placed Ms. Tiz in the ground, surrounded her with the slaughtered chickens, and filled in the hole. Then I said a few words about how she was a good mother of many litters of piglets, and a good mother, too. But then it got hard to talk for crying, so I just finished the rest in my head. Then I turned to go. Our cabin looked cheerless, dark, and lonely. Even though night was closing in fast, I knew I would start back to Ezra's. I didn't want to spend a night alone here, not when Weasel had been here and could come back. Better, I thought, to be moving through the darkness back to Molly, Pa, and Ezra than to be here alone. Besides, they were waiting for me. I'd be much later than expected, and I knew the feeling of waiting for someone to come back. I guessed that Weasel had ridden off on job, leading Krabby like I planned to do. He'd probably taken the piglets and a few of the chickens. Ms. Tiz, I thought sickly, had been too big to carry, but that hadn't saved her from Weasel.